All right, this is David Margolin. Welcome to another edition of the Forecast Contest discussion. Today's weekly leader is Michael Garoon. And without further ado, Michael, over to you.
All right, so to start us off this week, we're going to start off looking at the latest verification. So once again, verification was far colder than any of our forecasts. Closest was Paul Roundy at 90, but still was off by 12. CFS continues to be its usual bad self, and I figure we'll take a look at a couple of things. So this is the departure from normal for the 6th through the 10th, and I'm actually going to see something works. Can you guys see me drawing on this? You see the green circle or no?
Sorry, I was muted. Yes, no, that sounds great. Or it looks
Okay.
great.
Okay, because I think I wanted to see if this would work because I just noticed it, and this could be something useful for drawing maps for if people want to use it for their forecast. Share the screen and you could say, oh, pattern like that, which I mean this is the pattern, but very cold over basically the entire country, and even the warmth wasn't too impressive in the west. And I believe this one is, yes. So this was our 500 millibar pattern. So you can see a very, very strong ridge off the west coast, with the trough response in the east, causing all of our cold. So obviously, we missed something here. So does anyone have anything they want to say about this less than fortunate forecast for us?
Yeah, it's funny. I was just talking to Zach about this. I was looking ahead to next week too, and the projected number for next week. You don't have to shift it, but I think it's like 125 HDDs, and the closest forecast is about 120. So I guess the point there being, we saw this last week. We're seeing it this week, next week. One of the observations, right, is just the fact that after that period in September, for 4 weeks in a row, everyone underestimated the CDDs. Here we are in another period where everyone's underestimating the HDDs. I don't know, you have any?
Well, Mike, I think I see it up on your tabs, but you could pull up the like the CBC website to see if they actually have this pattern or not, because it just might be another week of us just being misled.
Let's see. This maybe more cold in the northeast with above normal warmth everywhere else. So I think it seems like they were a little too warm too, and based on Dr. Decker's forecast, while he was one of the colder ones, still not nearly cold enough. So I'm thinking um, below and above normal even out. So I think the CPC was predicting the pattern, but they just kind of underestimated the cold, or overestimated the warmth. Same side of the coin, but
Yeah, I was going to say, Michael, if you can you pull up the? Yeah, exactly.
Oh well, this is this week, but
Okay.
I'll find the.
Yeah, because then we can look at the CFS, EC, and the Maxar forecast all in one.
Let's see, products. When do we make this? So this would be October 29th.
22nd.
Oh. Okay. Yeah. So these guys were.
Yeah, they were better.
Yeah. I think they missed the where the heart of the cold would be a little bit, because it looks like but it's the wrong days. Go back now, 6 to 10. Or at least the extent of the cold, because I mean this is pretty close, and it's better than I did, so I can't really say that much. But it just kind of looks like they missed. It's kind of nitpicky, I guess. Maybe it's a little too wide on the cold. I don't know.
Looks like they might have missed some of those northeast cities a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, -7. Their map had only -2 tops. Maybe it's -3s floating around.
But on the other hand, kudos to them, right? I mean, they definitely performed better than the EC and the CFS. I mean, look at the EC and CFS there. Yeah. And by the way, right, we were talking about this the other week. The one time where the CFS actually goes super warm, goes in the other direction. Like the CFS was at 74 HDDs here. Go figure.
And I don't think, like, honestly, I don't, that's still really just so bizarre almost that it's just so consistently wrong no matter what the pattern is.
Yeah, reliably wrong. But can you go back to that Radiant one more, or Maxar page one more time?
Yeah.
Maybe if you let's take a look at their forecast reasoning here. If you want to go through that a little bit, were they onto something here?
I think they caught on to the double blocking with the EPO, NAO, and I guess the only thing I can find in here is they said MJO phase 6, which I will see if they were right about that. Where's
I believe they were.
MJO? They also mentioned. I mean, they mentioned the wrong one again. Over 3. Okay. So the negative NAO and the negative EPO. I think it was mainly the negative EPO pattern that drove this. If I remember last week, forget which one of them said it, but one of the two industry guests we had said that the EPO pattern was the major driver of this with the anomalous ridging. I don't know. Looks like October. Looks like the MJO was in a null phase. If I'm reading this correctly. During that time, 6 to 10. Phase 5 and 6, which they say is a warmer signal. So I guess the MJO didn't really have any effect on this forecast, considering they considered it a warm signal for the central, and obviously central was not warm. Although I guess you could see a little bit of warmth nosing in, so maybe it did. Anyway,
Mike, could we also see the pattern? Could you do on the Dynacast? Can we see the 500? Yeah. Okay, that's the pattern. It'd be great if we could save it'd be awesome. So we're able to look back at the temperature patterns from when the forecast was made on that Maxar 16 to 20 report, but we're not able to look at the 500 millibar height forecast at that time. Because I'm just curious what the EC and the CFS were showing at that time. I don't think that's readily available anywhere here.
Yeah, the closest you'd get is these things.
Yeah.
And the CFS is not helpful at all. I mean, it's just, there's nothing. Maybe you could argue that there looks to be some type of weak southeast ridge based off the anomalies in Florida, and maybe a weak ridge in the southwest based off of these anomalies. But other than that, I mean, I can't. If he asked me to make a pattern, I'd probably just draw a straight line with the jet across the country.
So let me ask you both a question here before we move on. And Mike, it's your show, so you tell us if when you want to move on. But based on everything you've seen here now, today and last couple of weeks, is there anything here that you think would really make you do something differently next time? Is there anything any signatures here, precursors that maybe we didn't realize then, but now we see? Anything in the radiant report here that, hey, next time if I see this forecast, but with the NAO negative or whatever, I'll probably go 10 HDDs colder than the EC. Is it there, or is it one of those things where you kind of look back and say, I still don't know?
The only thing I would do differently, honestly, is I would look more into the EPO, WPO. I think EPO is more important in those relationships, at least for our weather. But um, because as I understand it, the EPO has been a big driver of the cold thus far. Um, that and some Siberian highs sliding into Canada, but um, so that combined with knowing that the even the CFS is going to miss the cold somehow, even though it finds cold in the middle of summer. Um, though that's the only thing I would change. Other than that, I mean, this was record-breaking cold. So I mean, I haven't really seen a map like this in quite a while with anomalies um, this big. I mean, the normal's 35 in St. Cloud, and they had 22. I mean, that's kind of insane for early November to boot. So I mean, there's the only thing I would really change is look more into the EPO, and that's something I was planning on doing in the coming once we got into forecasting for December, which I think would be next week if I'm not mistaken. But that's all I would add, honestly.
I don't know what it is. It just doesn't seem like you can trust the models at all over the last month or so, and even the month before in September, you couldn't really trust them either. And when I go into my forecast process, my first thing that I want to do is look at the models. So if maybe it's still because it's technically a transition season, we're not fully in winter yet. That maybe for next time you just don't look really at the models at all. You just try and look at like these EPO, WPO, NAO patterns and just base your forecast off that and don't really look at the models at all. Because I mean, you can go back to the industry report and there's no indication of anything of the sort in the EC or the CFS, and it's been that way for the last 2 weeks. So I guess next time I would just maybe look at them briefly, but not really take them into account at all. I don't really see any reason to.
And if you didn't take those into account, what would you take into account? Like, what would your number be? Would it be 30-year normal? Would it be 10? Would it be what's your process look like?
I mean, I'd have to think about it, but I would definitely switch over to maybe more of like a teleconnections, like what's physically happening rather than what the models are predicting, and see what kind of pattern they suggest, and then roll with whatever that would be.
Yeah.
So if it was like a negative NEO, then I think, oh, below normal cold in the east on the East Coast. Then if the WPO agrees with that, then I would just go with a number colder than normal, something like that.
And to that, I think those are really interesting ideas. And from a practical standpoint, right, we're not that far away from actually testing some of those hypotheses. Like what I heard from Michael was effectively, and correct me if I'm wrong, Michael, or some version of this, hey, if I see that the EPO, in a situation like this, if the EPO is initialized negative, like, there's a block over Alaska, or, something like that, I might fade colder. I think maybe the models underestimate that, et cetera. Something to that degree. Well, how do we test that, right? We can come up with a methodology to test that. Yeah, exactly. So, if we, and some of the research that Zach is doing, looking at the historical relationship between MJO and model errors, or model errors and MJO, just replace that with EPO, right? And the hypothesis being that Michael would test is, again, let's say we had even 5 years of data. If we had 5 years of data of the EPO and 5 years of data of the CFS or EC 16 to 20-day forecast, we could test that theory. At the very basic level, we can see if there is a bias that's beyond the normal bias or whatever in those situations. And if there is, then that gives some credibility to your ideas. And I think then then maybe it's something that you can more defensively add to your sort of your formula. So anyway, the point is though, I like how you guys are thinking about that, and the next step, and hopefully we can continue to do some of this through the forecast contest and otherwise, is now how do we actually test that, right? Getting the data, getting the methodology, and doing the analysis. So the only other thing I would add to that, my pet project is the cold source region. Well, I mean, we've talked about this for a few weeks now, and God knows you see it. Yeah, just an awesome bullseye. And if you look back at the last 7 days, you still see it. And this is kind of a sneak preview of my forecast, right? But my hypothesis being that when you have this abundance of cold/snow cover, but in particular cold over Canada, that the EC in particular underestimates it, and that there is an associated bias with that. Again, that's subjective, it's experiential, but as we think about those kinds of tests, that's another one I'd love to plug and play and see if there's any validity to it.
Yeah, we can look at that. Okay, so does anyone have anything else that they want to add before we move on to the current forecast?
What were you looking at? It looked like reforecast data for the EPO and WPO. What was that?
Oh, this is the forecasts for the PNA, NAO, WPO, and EPO from last night. It's not a reforecast. This is just the actual forecast.
Oh, okay.
For I used this a little bit last winter. This forecast is kind of bad. Not gonna lie, but because it would always show like something like what the WPO looks like it wants to do, go really positive, and then it would just end up kind of flat or slightly negative, and it would just kind of do the opposite. But that might just be my own personal bias remembering that, or maybe it was a bad year for it. I'm not sure. If you want, this is the website that I use for this stuff. I don't know where else to find it, but I'm sure there's other places. Anyway, okay, so we'll move on to the current, where we'll do our usual, our usual, what do you want to call it?
Yeah, for our script or whatever.
Go too far.
And Michael, did you say we're ready for that?
Yeah.
Hey, I just noticed. Looks like I think Steve Bennett is on, one of our industry experts.
Hi guys. Yep, I've been hiding in the corner here.
Hey, no, great.
Nobody would notice me. I'm practicing my best Dave Margolin.
Well, no, it's great to have you here, and I just want you're welcome, obviously, to stay in the shadows. But we're going to go through this new communication piece we're experimenting with, and basically the intent is for the audience to be like the client. So feel free to chime in here as if you're on the receiving end, and if you have any probing questions or criticism, or you can be that hard-ass client or whatever, or you could be the nice one. But just whatever, feel free to jump in when Michael and Zach kind of go through their spiel.
Perfect. Absolutely, will do.
Thank you.
All right. Before I jump into my spiel, though, I'll just go through these a little, broadly. So it looks like this time we do have a number of forecasts that are significantly colder than both the EC, the CFS is back to being chilly, but we're still colder than the CFS as well. So hopefully this week continues. It's a very cold pattern, so that we can maybe get a decent forecast in here where nobody is cold enough. Yeah. Well. All right. So without further ado, I'll do my 2 minutes. So hello everyone. My HDD forecast for this week was 118.5 HDDs. This is slightly above the 30-year normal of 117.4 HDDs. The reasoning behind my forecast, I went into my usual forecast formula: 60% teleconnections, 30% CPC, and 10% 10-year. So the teleconnections, the NAO looks to be wanting to go negative. The PNA wants to stay positive, and the AO is staying negative. So this screams trough in the East Coast, or at the very least in the eastern half of the country, Ridge West. And the CPC agrees with this almost verbatim. You can see Ridge below West with the above normals, and trough East with the below normals. And I forgot to show while I was doing this, positive PNA, negative NAO, and negative AO. So as far as risks go for this forecast, there are a couple. If the cold pool in Canada runs out before we get to this point, then of course that would significantly raise the HDDs. So you'd have a warmer forecast, I should clarify. If the NAO or PNA don't, or the AO for that matter, don't do what they're predicted to do, then that could pose a problem. Although I will mention that the PNA has been verifying towards the positive, so that's a good sign for the forecast. And are there any questions that anyone has regarding the forecast? Okay. So in that case, we will go.
Michael, I have a question. Why do you think the models miss this forecast so badly?
You mean the last forecast?
Yeah, over the last few days we've been talking to you. It seems like the European CFS has been really crappy, missing the cold, and just wondering what's going on there. Why do you think that is?
Well, my hypothesis is that, as I'm sure you know, the cold that we've been seeing has been record-breaking in certainly the Midwest. Chicago, I believe, broke a record low, and might have broken one last night. I'd have to verify that. So record-breaking cold, and the models tend to struggle, in my experience, with record-breaking events. They usually underdo them a little bit. In this case, it was a lot of bit. Especially in early November, more of a transitional season than not the full transitional season, but more so than you would see in November. So I think they're struggling a little bit with some of the extremes. In this case, the extreme cold was just completely missed by the models because it just didn't. I don't think it really believed that it could be that cold, for lack of a better phrase.
Okay, and what do you think? What do you think is going to break this pattern?
I think the only thing that could really break the pattern is if we break down that EPO ridge that's been causing the trough in the central part of the country and also the east, which is forecast to happen. But it looks like it'll be more of a neutral signal, so could definitely be breaking the ridge. Although the NAO is predicted now to go negative around the same time, so we'd have to have a break in the NAO as well to really get the pattern to flip back to a warmer or seasonable pattern.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Sure, I'll take a shot. So looking at the screen here, looks like there's a herd. All the forecasts are in the same direction. And so if you're betting against the 10-year moving average, it's pretty much all data, right? All forecast data is colder than that. Talk around the risks of a reversal So everything winds up being wrong. How wrong is it going to be? What are the signals that we're going to have for that? When will we start to see that? Start there, and then we'll come to the other side of that.
Okay, so the main risks here are, as I noted, if the NAO doesn't begin to tank and the EPO does head towards positive, so we lose all that ridging, then we lose the trough as a result of those ridges. Excuse me. And as a result of that, we would see a pretty big warm up in at the very least in the East Coast, where most of the cold is predicted to be. So we'd probably see values as low as on the extreme side, maybe around the EC forecast of 107, I believe I have. Yeah. So this is the EC forecast, I believe, ensemble for this period. So there would be some broad warmth with a more zonal pattern without any of the ridging and troughing. So you'd be more along the warmer side. So probably, like I said, probably around the 107 ish.
What do you think the probability is that we end up in this period at 107 or less?
I'd say it's on the lower side, in my opinion, around 25% maybe. There's always that risk, you can't, especially when
So a 1 in 4 chance that we wind up warmer than 107. That's a bettable probability. I'm going to be right 1 in 4 times when I bet that.
Well, I didn't think it was, but
I bet it 4 times. I'm going to win once.
I mean, yeah, I suppose that's true, but 75% were colder than that. So on the flip side, if that I just it's a risk, but I don't think we'll see it personally.
Okay.
Anyone have any other questions?
No. Good.
All right.
How about colder than 121?
Colder than 121. I don't really see any support for a pattern cold enough that it would get past 121. I mean, we did just have 120. Do I have it? I don't have it. We did just the forecast for the next verification, so that would be the 13th to the 17th, I think. Yeah. Is it? Yeah. This verification is expected to be 126, but that's with definitely a more broad cold pool, still including part of the central, and it looks like the central won't be as involved in the next cold shot, at least not in areas like Texas and probably parts of Montana and Nebraska and Kansas, probably the western parts of those. So maybe I'll give it like 10% odds, which definitely.
So I'm more likely to be warmer than 107 than I am to be colder than whatever that was, 121 or something.
Yeah.
Is that how you see it?
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
All right. If nobody has any other questions, we can move on to the next person, I guess. Zach, if you don't mind, since you're doing it the way.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, Michael, and I was just going to mention one thing before we move off this. I think it was a great question by Steve, from Steve. I know the 25% might seem low and not as interesting, but it's sort of like, professional gamblers and stuff. You're just looking for that edge, right? And that's how, if you're an energy trader or something like that, again, if you think that the market is pricing in that type of event at, I don't know, 15%, but you're saying to Steve, I think it's 25%. That's a huge difference, right? And a good trader will look at that and say, oh, I'll trade this every time. Because over whatever, 1,000 trades or 100 trades, I'm not going to win it every time, but I'm going to win it more than I lose it. And I'm going to beat the market more, and I'm going to win money. I'm going to make money from that, right? And so that's why it's really important to understand those low and high probability events, and then to try to understand how the market's interpreted it, and to see, because then you can identify those opportunities.
Yeah, I kind of realized that when he said it, that 25%, I guess, to a trader would be a better odds than I realized.
And I would be weighing the payouts. So if you think about, there is an instance where if I make a 1 in 4 bet, I might actually return like 10x on what I put in, right? So I might be able to bet $1 and win $10. And what I'm going to be thinking is, every time I've got a 25% probability. So if on a 25% bet I put in $1, I win $1. Or I put in $1 and I think I'm going to win 10 cents. That's all going to affect whether I take that bet or not. So if I feel like the market is strongly weighing cold, and I feel like if I bet warm at this point, I might lose $1, but I have the opportunity to make $5 or $10. On a 25%, I'm probably going to bet that.
Yeah, I was gonna change it, but I figured it. In this instance, I might as well just stick with my guns, because when you said 25% was 1 in 4, and you made me think of it like that, I realized I went way too high of a percentage.
And I think that's probably a really good lesson, right? Like, I think whenever you're
Yeah.
thinking probabilistically, I would always do that conversion in your head, of 25% equals 1 in 4, 33% equals 1 in 3, right?
Yeah, that's what I did when you asked about the colder than 121. I was thinking, it's like, okay, 10%, 1 in 10. That doesn't sound like good odds. So that's why I went with 10%.
And then the other thing there would be, given that, now I'm looking at a 1 in 4 chance of being surprisingly warm, and I'm looking at a 1 in 10 chance of being surprisingly cold. So now actually what you're doing is you're giving me even more fodder to bet the warm side if I think there's an outsized return, right? So
Yeah.
even that response would, the response on the warm versus the cold is something I'm also weighing as as I'm thinking about the bets I'm going to put on.
Yeah, I mean, if I redid that part, then or redid the question, answering the question, I should say, I probably would have changed the 1 in 4 chance of warmer to something like 1 in 10 or 1 in 11, something like that.
So in that case, you'd be giving it an equal probability of coming in warmer or colder.
Yeah.
And what you're telling me is that there's pretty high confidence in the forecast overall, because you're telling me there's basically an 80% chance that you're going to come in between those. You're going to come in between 109 and 121. That's pretty high confidence for a forecast at this lead time, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to give the in this instance, I don't want to give the at least within the range that was given, of 107 to 121. I didn't want to give I ended up giving it, but um I don't really want to give, like, I don't think it'll be warmer than 107, but I don't think it'll be colder than 121. So I mean, I could be dead wrong, but with a 20 HDD window, I felt it was a good enough range
Hey,
to.
hey, Michael,
Yeah.
not to beat you up here, but and this is a reminder for me too. Remember, we have our spread here, which is our 1 sigma values, right? So you want to first of all, you remember you can leverage that to also help with your probabilities, right? Because you should be, what do you have? 14, about 14 HDs.
Yeah.
So that mean number, and assuming it's a normal distribution, which I think we can assume for now. You could say, hey, 70% of the distribution is going to fall, plus or minus 14 HDDs from this number. But on the other side of it too, just from that hard ass client thing side, you want to make sure that if this is what went out to the client, that what you're telling them and communicating to them is consistent with that. So in other words, if you said something like, yeah, it's not going to be above 121, a client might say to you, well, man, why are you showing a 1 sigma one sigma standard deviation of 14 HDDs? Why don't you show something closer to like 3 or 4 HDDs if you really don't think it's going to move that much? Again, that's getting in the details a little bit, but you do want to make sure that your communication is consistent with what you send out to the client.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, but
And the
I
other
mean,
way I look at it is to say that that's exactly right. I'm not sure. I'm not as familiar with the table here, but one of the things that I would ask would be, historically, right? And that's, you've got the 10-year. That one's easy enough to find in the table here. So I guess actually what you're saying is that the 10-year normal is it's basically 112, and the one standard deviation around that is about 14, right?
Right.
So historically being outside that range is not that, there is a reasonable probability that you're going to be outside that range just given history.
yeah. Okay. Well, that was very insightful for me at the very least. So thanks for that. Okay, so Zach, I believe you were going to give us your spiel, as Dave so quaintly put it.
Yeah. All right. Hi, everybody. For this forecast period of November 27th to December 1st, I forecasted an HD value of 119.4 with a 1.5 sigma spread of 22 HDDs. This forecast comes in slightly cooler than the 30-year normal. My forecast process kind of looking at a blend of the CPC, CFS, and EC patterns while keeping the 30-year normal metric in mind, as it is generally the better metric during the wintertime. What I expect the pattern to be is something similar to what Michael pointed out, a ridge in the west and a trough in the east. The CFS does resemble that pattern, and then I'll get into my risks. Where it kind of devolves is what the EC and the CFS show. So I believe there's risk in terms of where the potential cold could be. The EC and the CFS don't really show it. They show more of a broad ridge pattern. But what's interesting is that they do show an instance of a strong negative NAO, which does lead to cooler than normal temperatures along the East Coast. The CPC does also show the potential for the AO and the NAO to be in that negative phase as well. So a bit of a discrepancy in the models there, and it seems to be the biggest discrepancy is where the cold in the East Coast is. So that led to my, higher than normal spread. I feel like there's a lot of uncertainty in this forecast, but based on the CPC agreeing pretty well with what the NAO phases are going to be in, and then what the EC and CFS were showing for that NAO phase, I believe that there will be below normal cold in the east, leading to my colder than normal forecast. Does anybody have any questions?
I've got a question. You implied, I think, by your spread, you said 1.5 sigma, that you have low confidence.
Mhm.
Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
And why? What in particular about this forecast makes you have that low confidence?
I think it's just a bit of a discrepancy in the pattern. The models have not been reliable lately, but they're still strong models, and the fact that they're showing, normal to maybe potentially above normal temperatures across most of the country leads me to believe that there's the possibility for that. But then the CPC showing below normal temperatures, that led me to some the discrepancy made me uncertain. Because you still have to have some trust in the models, but based on how they're performing recently, you don't really want to, but you still have to factor them in slightly.
Well, since you went there, can you talk about that? What do you mean exactly that you have to factor them in?
I mean, these are strong, forecast metrics, and sometimes it's, just I don't know how to answer this best.
Is it for example, does the forecast performance over the last month or two suggest to you that it's performing better than the 30-year, that we should include it, or is that or are there other reasons why you think that it's going to add value to your forecast?
I think, based on the way that they've been performing, my confidence in them is low, but I still, as I think I had mentioned this before I did this little spiel, that I still want to look at them. Whether or not I've truly factored them into my forecast is one thing, but just the fact that the two of them were showing a similar pattern, but also reflecting a pattern that the CPC was showing, led me to put a little bit more weight on them than I normally would. Even though their performance has been bad, I still think that there was something there to kind of reflect what I forecasted.
Okay, thank you.
So similar question that I asked Michael. So what do you think the probability is that we come in warmer than what are we looking at? The EC? Is the EC the warmest here? Yeah, 108. What are the odds, do you think, that we come in warmer than 108?
I know it's tough to put an exact number to it. I would say probably around 20%, just because of how uncertain I am about this forecast. I put it coming in warmer, much warmer than normal, about 20%, and much colder than normal, about 20%. Again, I'm not, for whatever the reason, they're showing something. They haven't been reliable, but I still think that there's something there that, we could see warmer than normal temperatures across much of the U.S.
So about a 1 in 5 that you're warmer than the EC. What would you say the probability is that you're colder than the MJO analog, so colder than 121?
I put that at about 20% as well. If you have a strong, both the EC and the CFS are showing a strong NAO, negative NAO. CPC seem to be reflecting that pattern as well. You could come in with temperatures a lot cooler than normal along the East Coast, where there's a lot of population centers. So there's pretty good chance. There's a chance that could happen as well. I put both below and above at around 20% each.
Okay, and your center line's 119, right? Is that right? Am I reading the table right?
Yes.
So if I've got a 20% chance of being colder than 121 and a 20% chance of being warmer than 108, I think what you're telling me then is that the probabilities are skewed pretty dramatically warmer than your forecast. So if you're going to be wrong, I think what you're saying is you're going to be too cold. It's more likely to be warmer than what you say. Am I interpreting that right?
I believe so, yeah.
Got it.
I got another question for you. I think, and Michael may be able to show this a little bit, but you've probably been, if not the top performer, right up there over the last, when did you start? 2 months ago, 3 months ago? When did we hire you?
Yeah, I think it was in June.
We hired you in June or whatever. No. But no, yeah, since you started this, you've been like one of the top performers, if not the top. Can you talk a little bit about your strategy during this period? What do you attribute your high scores to? And I mean this, I guess, relative to the market, right? The market being all these other forecasts we have, EC, CFS, and human. You've done better in most cases overall. What's your secret?
I believe for for the last 4 months or so, it seems that when I look at some of these analogs that, either whether it's a human analog or a forecast analog, it seems that a lot of people consistently have the same formula statement, where I try to make it a week to week thing, because I don't want to get stuck in the same forecast cycle over and over again. So I always try and factor in different analogs, which is why, for the heating season so far, I think my forecast weighting scheme has changed every single week, because I try and, be flexible and stay on my toes in terms of switching around what I feel is important and what isn't. So that's the first thing I can think of about what my strategy tends to be. And sometimes it's a blend of, sometimes it's what the physical teleconnection, like the physical patterns are showing. Sometimes it's what the models are showing based on how I feel the models have been doing. It changes.
So as a client, I mean, I like the fact that you're adapting, it sounds like, but it worries me that I feel like I can't back test that strategy because it's obviously you've been doing good for the last few months, but I'm worried, what if you're just getting lucky? So how can you make me feel better about that? Is there any way, say I'm paying you a ton of money, that you can better make me feel more comfort about that this strategy, this adaptive strategy, is going to continue to work for the next 6 months? Is there any way we can test it, what have you, so that we can better understand how robust it is?
Well, I'd say that my strategy, and I iterated about how I try to keep an adaptive strategy, but there are some times where the strategy is pretty similar week to week. It changes, but overall the sense of it kind of stays the same. And if something happens where one of my forecasts busts, then I switch over to try something else. There is still like an underlying consistency to them, even though it changes a bit. So if we had the ability to go back and see which general ideas, which general forecast strategies worked and which ones didn't, then I could definitely give you more confidence in me.
Okay, so it sounds like there might be a portion of that weighting scheme which is kind of locked in for the most part. Then there's a portion of it which is where you allow for more adaptive, more subjective interpretation of things, and you found that some sort of model between those two works pretty well. And that, again, that part that maybe it's 80%, 70%, which is more fixed, you could actually is a more repeatable type process that we could back test. And then that other portion of it is more experiential, harder to back test at the moment, but it's based on your sort of interpretation, intuition, whatever that forecaster. Okay, that helps me. Thank you.
It's a really dumb question, and just shows my inexperience with the platform that you're showing here. What forecast has performed best over the last 6 weeks or so?
So this is going to be, we don't have it set up so that we can look exactly at 6, but this is 4 weeks.
Okay. That's fine.
Yeah, this is heating season, so the last 4 weeks, and then, it looks like that's sorted. So actually,
it's Zach's the best forecast.
Yeah,
with the 4 forecasts anyway.
Yeah, Zach. There's Zach.
These two only have 1, so they don't.
Oh, I see. So Zach's had 4 forecasts in 4 weeks. The ones above that had 1 forecast in 4 weeks.
And something else I'll point out, I mean, just look at the drop off. I mean, there's Zach at 0.7, and then the next is Phil at minus 15. So
I also think
manifestation of potentially our forecast metric, because as I mentioned before to Dave, before the call started, he was complimenting me on how well I was doing, and I was saying, well, I've been off by 20 HDEs for like the last 3 weeks, so it's hard to say that I've been doing well. It's just that compared to verification compared to 30-year, I'm doing better. So you got to take some of this with a grain of salt. I would not consider myself doing very well right now, especially seeing what my bias is. But
Well, you're doing better than the rest of us, so.
in terms of the
Yeah.
metric, yeah.
And versus, you don't have to do this, but if you sort it versus consensus, which is another good way to kind of look at things. And then again, on the opposite end here, and by the way, too, you could certainly say that when you're talking to clients. I mean, you don't want to sound conceited, but I mean, it is an important data point to say, hey, my performance over the last, whatever, 6 months has been good. You can defend it, you can show it. And on the other hand, here's the ECMWF near the bottom, right? Like literally at the bottom.
Yep.
Stunning. This is one of the reasons why I love having these metrics, right? Like I knew we probably would have guessed the EC is not doing well, but I didn't realize it was actually the worst of all these different inputs.
Let alone worse than the CFS, which, I mean, during the
And
cooling season.
Yeah.
No.
And Zach, so that actually leads to another question for your forecast. So knowing that actually leads me to ask one more question for you. So what this tells me, I think, is that over the course of the last 4 weeks, you've been consistently colder than the rest. And today, I think what you told me is your centerline forecast is still cold, but your uncertainty is all in the warmer direction now, or mostly in the warmer direction now. Any thoughts around why that is, or am I making assumptions that you don't really feel are correct?
No, it's true. I just, because the models have been so poor recently, and as we've seen in this contest, for whatever the reason, the models seem to get in like a 3 to 4 week span where they just do really, really poorly, and then the performance kind of dips back up again. So we're kind of in that region, or in that time frame, where the models could potentially get the pattern, and grasp the pattern a little bit better. So because the EC and the CFS are showing warmer patterns, there is the potential that they could actually be right this time. Again, this is all just based on intuition and what we've seen throughout this contest, but we're around that time where the models might actually grasp the pattern correctly, which is why you do see that potential for that warmer.
Got it. So you think we've kind of gone through a period where the model performance was poor and now should be returning to better performance, and so you're weighting the models a little bit more heavily now because of that, essentially, which is why you think, again, your centerline forecast is still cold, so it's not that you're forecasting warm, but your uncertainty is all in the warmer direction because of that. Got it. And that's, Dave, I think the thing you were saying would be nice to quantify.
Yeah, no, exactly. And actually, one other corollary to that is, again, this would be nice to quantify. I think what we've seen is, in particular, in pattern transitions, right? Going back to the summer, it's the ECMWF and CFS, but ECMWF in particular, the performance has been horrific. We actually have some data to back this up. I don't have it at the moment, but one of our other students created a nice little chart that showed this. Horrific during pattern changes. So, A, it would be good to better quantify that, though, and B, to the point that Zach's sort of making, if you don't believe you're in that pattern transition right now, which is hard to say, but then the scores might actually be quite a bit better than during those inflection points. Well, and Michael, back over to you, but I know we're just about out of time here.
Yeah, there's one thing I wanted to point out. No, I wanted to ask a question. That's what it was. This is one actually for you, Dave. I don't know can we actually make it so that if I put in, like, say, I think there's with my forecast I have 118, let's say, and I think there's a high chance that it'll be warmer than that, but a lower chance it'll be colder than that. Can I put something in the sigma instead of the 14.3, so 14 colder, 14 warmer? can I put in like say 16 warmer but only 8 colder? Is that something? I mean, I imagine based on the error system that would kind of really complicate things. But is that something that's doable in
It,
any?
it probably is doable at some point, but to answer your question, functionally at the moment, no. The best way to do that would be to submit that in your comments in any of the comment sections. Longer term, I think it is something definitely for us to consider. So obviously, right now we can capture sort of a normal distribution or spread, but we can't capture functionally the skew, which is kind of what you're saying. But I think. I think it would be good to kind of consider approaches for that. And I think it would actually be good at minimum, not this week, but maybe next week, we could put this on our list. Maybe Zach, while you're writing stuff down, to talk about that, because that's a really difficult topic. I know Steve could test this too. And you could ask like, me or whatever, someone who's been forecasting for a long time. How do you make a forecast? How do when you're in a situation, maybe like today, what's your mean, what's your distribution, and what's your skew? And how do you determine those three things? Because in a number of cases, you might be in a situation where, well, if someone's saying, hey, I think there's significant risk for warmer, a logical question might be, well, why don't you just shift your mean warmer? And sometimes that is the right answer. Just meteorologists kind of struggle with that. But then there probably are also statistical, mathematical reasons to do that, right? When the mean and the median are different. So I think, at least as an initial step, maybe what we can do is have a conversation, allocate some time during one of these meetings to go into that.
Yeah, no, I think that sounds good. So without further ado, we're at the time limit. So Dave and everybody else, if nobody minds, I'll make it only 60 seconds. I'll really shorten my little research spiel if that's okay with everyone.
60 seconds, otherwise we're going to cut you off.
All right. So my research is looking to find a reliable bias correction method for the euro that improves forecasting accuracy in terms of CDDs and HDDs. My current results for this over the CDD season going from May to October are the two inputs. I'll show you the chart here. Input 4 and input 2 were able to outperform using my skill metric. The euro, which is input 1 here in blue, they have one caveat is they have not consistently outperformed the euro, but they have shown that they can outperform the euro at least in over the course of a season. More testing is obviously needed since we only have about 6 months of data, so keep you posted on that. Some works in progress, a few more graphs, some more bias correction methods that if I can explain if anyone has extra time and wants to know, and looking at some other areas that can be bias corrected, such as the 500 millibar pattern of the EC. And that's it.
What's the particular weighting scheme for inputs? We said 4.
I use something called MAPE, mean absolute percent error. So it's, if I can find the formula, yeah, so it's 100 for the 100%, so these values are in percentages, times the absolute value of the error of the bias correction. So for, I guess, input 4, that's, I'll use input 3 because it's still on the screen. So that would be, you can see J6, so this number, which is the error for the reverse bias corrected, minus the E6, which is the, actually, no, my mistake. It's the number of the euro, of the forecast bias correction, if I could figure this out, minus the verification, divided by the verification, and the absolute value obviously prevents any negative weirdness. So it's just the number of the forecast given out by the bias correction minus the verification divided by the verification, absolute value times 100%. I think the actual number without the 100% is like 0.63, so it's decimal.
Well, what is, like you said, what was it, inputs 2 and 4 were the best
Yeah,
round? Like, what are they? Like, what is input 4 and input 2?
and that is in, let's see, partially methodology. Input 2 is just a flat bias correction. I used the the forecast contest website to find the Euro bias when I started this project. I found it was 4.8 CDDs, too cold, and I just added 4.8 CDDs to the Euro forecast, and that was the second best performance. So, and a takeaway from that, if you want, is that adding a flat bias correction to the Euro, at least during the summer months, was pretty good. Gave you a slight increase in skill just based off of MAPE. So it hasn't been doing too well recently, obviously, since the Euro has been too warm. So the other one is a 10-year blend bias. So the 10-year, as I'm sure you know, was doing pretty well over the summer. So I took a 75% of the 10-year forecast and combined it with 25% of the Euro forecast, and that, as you can see from the chart, performed significantly better than all the other inputs. And one other thing I'll just mention here is almost all of these took a really big hit on the last forecast of the CDD season, because there were actually input 10 was actually the best forecast up until the last week, and then all of these got completely destroyed except for inputs 2 and 4. So
That's an important point, more in terms of how robust and resilient. So that's certainly something you might want to put in your conclusions. But I was just say, and I'll see if Steve has a question here. But since we're out of time, I think this is definitely moving in the right direction. Maybe one of your goals could be for the next time, for the next week, if you could summarize this in a very short, like almost executive summary, I guess, but literally, you know what I mean? So like, put what you just said, boil it down to like, a half email, like here's the purpose, here's my methodology, here's the key takeaways and results, and here are a couple things I'm doing next. If you can boil that down into like almost like what you have there, like half email, and just send it out to us in advance, I think that could be really helpful. And then in us continuing this kind of conversation, and then leading us to what our eventual goal is, which is then being able to share this with other industry folks like Steve and other folks out there, and to see if they have feedback and if this could be of value to them.
yeah, okay, I can do that.
Steve, anything you want to add before we close it out?
No, nothing to add. I appreciate you guys having a good attitude with my questions. So,
No,
I appreciate that.
It was really helpful. I think, especially the odds thing. It makes you think about what you're saying a little bit more, especially in those instances.
That's true. All right then. All right. Thank you, everyone, and hopefully we'll do it again next week.
Yep.
All right. Bye, guys.
Bye.